All right, everyone, get ready because today we're really diving into some intense stuff.
Yeah, this one's a bit of a nail biter.
We're talking about the global economy.
Not just like the usual stock market ups and downs, but like
This is about how the whole thing almost went kaput.
twice.
More than once. And if you think this is just about numbers and charts,
It gets real
it gets very real.
very quickly.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about the source material today, this presentation by economist Richard Duncan, is that he really connects these like near-death experiences of the global economy to this completely new economic order that he argues we've actually entered into.
Which he calls creditism.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But to understand that, we kind of have to rewind the clock a little bit because as we've seen, history has a way of repeating itself.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Right, that's right. That's right. Okay, so pop quiz, everyone. Back to school we go.
Yeah.
And this isn't just going to be like, boring econ 101. We're going straight for like the worst of the worst.
1930s.
The 1930s.
Yeah.
And I think, most people, they know it as the Great Depression. But what I think is so interesting about Duncan is he really like digs into these details that I think a lot of us, we kind of gloss over.
Yeah, and it's easy to think about the Great Depression as this sort of abstract historical event.
Right.
But the scale of the devastation was just immense. And I think one of the details from the presentation that stuck with me the most was that in the United States alone, during the Great Depression, a third of all banks just disappeared.
Gone.
Imagine if that happened today.
I can't even.
Your savings, your livelihood, everything gone.
Yeah.
Overnight.
And that's like one tiny little piece of it. We're talking 25% unemployment.
Yeah.
1 in 4 people out of work.
It's hard to fathom.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that kind of like economic freefall. And I think what's so scary about this is that it's not like this was some, unavoidable natural disaster.
Right.
This was a man-made crisis driven by, you guessed it, credit.
Yeah, over-reliance on credit.
Right.
And at the time, it was this very hands-off approach from the government.
Right. Laissez-faire.
Laissez-faire economics, but it was more like let it burn.
Let it burn economics.
And burn it did.
Yeah.
But I think this is the important point. This serves as a very, very stark warning, a cautionary tale of what can happen when the system that we build that's predicated on debt spirals out of control.
Right.
Because as Duncan illustrates, this wasn't just a one-off,
Yeah.
right? Fast forward to 2008, we see these exact same dangerous patterns start to reemerge once again.
Okay, so cue the scary music.
Okay.
2008.
Yeah.
The housing bubble
Yep,
bursts.
that's right.
Thanks. I mean, everyone's holding their breath. We all lived through it.
We all remember it vividly.
But what Duncan argues is that it was way, way closer than any of us even realize.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where I think this idea of creditism becomes so important. Because what he argues staved off complete and utter meltdown in 2008 wasn't some miracle.
Right.
It was a fundamental shift in how governments responded to a crisis like this.
Exactly.
Because unlike the 1930s, this time around, they didn't just sit back and let the whole thing explode.
Right.
They intervened on a massive scale.
Yeah, they did.
We're talking bailouts, stimulus packages, slashing interest rates to like practically zero.
It was unprecedented.
I remember at the time thinking, this is unprecedented.
Absolutely.
This is insane.
And it was incredibly controversial.
Oh, yeah.
And some would argue terrifying, these actions that were taken.
Right.
But Duncan's point is, and this is where I think some of the charts that he uses in his presentation are really illuminating, without those drastic measures, 2008 wouldn't have just been a recession. It would have been a complete and utter catastrophe.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of that.
Yeah.
We're talking 2008, but like way, way worse. What does that world even look like? What would happen if governments didn't intervene?
It would have been, think about everything that happened in 2008.
Right.
But just dial it up.
Right.
Way up.
Yeah.
Like exponentially worse. Imagine, like, how during the pandemic there were those bank runs?
Yeah.
Imagine that. But it's not just like a couple of branches.
Right.
System-wide.
Yeah.
Your savings are just gone. You
Yeah.
can't get your money.
Poof.
Gone.
Wow.
And it wouldn't even stop there.
Right.
It's not just your personal finances that are in the toilet.
Right. This is like the whole shebang.
This is the global economy grinding to a halt. We're talking like international trade, supply chains that have just totally disintegrated.
Right, right, right.
Shortages of everything.
Food, medicine,
Food,
housing,
housing,
everything.
the essentials, prices through the roof, currencies like plummeting in value. I mean, And that's when things, I think, get really, really scary.
Yeah.
Because Duncan's not afraid to say that this could lead to widespread social unrest,
Oh, yeah.
violence even,
Of course.
because people are desperate.
100%. You know, there's that saying, I can't remember who said it, but like civilization is 9 meals away from anarchy.
Right. It's not just about the food. It's about, like you said, the entire system that we've built our lives on just completely falling apart.
Exactly. And this isn't some sort of like, dystopian sci-fi.
Right.
This is what a lot of economists, this is a real possibility that could have happened if we didn't take the measures that we did in 2008.
Yeah.
It's really a testament to I think how fragile the system really is.
Right.
And how much we rely on this constant flow of credit.
Right. Which brings us, I think, back to this whole new economic order that we've entered into, this creditism that Duncan talks about.
Yeah.
So help us connect the dots here a little bit.
Yeah.
How did we go from like the brink of total collapse in 2008 to this new economic reality?
Well, it's kind of a fascinating and honestly terrifying evolution in a way, because what Duncan is saying is that those interventions back in 2008,
Right.
they were necessary to avert disaster in the short term.
But what they also did was fundamentally change how the game is played. We entered this new era where government intervention on this massive scale, it's not just an option anymore.
It's essential
It's a necessity. It's like a life support system.
for a system that's totally addicted to credit, essentially.
Exactly. So yeah, we averted one crisis,
Right.
but at what cost?
Right. So we've averted one crisis, but we've done so by becoming completely reliant on these interventions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which sounds, I don't know, not great.
Right.
Is that essentially what creditism is then?
I think so, yeah.
It's like this constant need for bailouts, stimulus, keeping interest rates artificially low.
It's this system where like debt is fueling growth,
Right.
but it's artificial growth.
It's not real.
Right. And it's not sustainable in the long term.
Right. We're hooked on this drip feed of credit.
Yeah, exactly. And as soon as you cut off that drip feed,
Everything falls apart.
everything falls apart. And the thing is, this isn't just about the government doing this, right?
This is all of us.
This is businesses, individuals.
We're all hooked on credit.
Yeah. We're all caught in this web of like debt fueled consumption.
Right. Right. So if this creditism is as precarious as it sounds, what's the way out? Can we wean ourselves off of this debt without triggering the mother of all meltdowns? And I know Duncan, he proposes a solution, right?
He does, yeah.
This idea of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund.
It's a pretty bold idea.
Yeah.
Basically, imagine this massive government backed investment fund.
Okay.
But instead of just managing existing assets,
Yeah.
its main purpose is to actually shape the future of the U.S. economy.
Okay. Now we're talking. Tell me more about the sovereign wealth fund. How would this even work? So this isn't just about patching up the holes in a sinking ship.
Right.
We're talking about building a whole new boat, essentially. It almost sounds too good to be true. How do we get from this constant cycle of just bailing out the system to actually building a more sustainable and resilient economy?
That's the question, right? And I think that's what makes Duncan's proposal so intriguing, because he's not suggesting we just tweak things around the edges.
Right.
He's talking about something far more ambitious. Instead of propping up failing industries, what if we proactively invest in the industries of the future?
Okay.
Emerging technologies, innovation.
So a real fundamental shift in thinking.
Exactly. From short-term fixes to a long-term vision for the U.S. economy.
But how do you even begin to do that? How do you implement something so massive?
Well, that's the challenge, right?
I mean, that's a Herculean effort.
Absolutely. Duncan himself admits this is not going to be easy.
Right.
It would require a level of political will that, frankly, we haven't seen in a long time. And then there's the issue of, how do you ensure transparency and accountability with something like this?
Right.
With that much money at stake, you have to think about the potential for mismanagement, for corruption. These are real concerns.
And let's not forget, the second you even mention something like this, it becomes such an ideological battleground. Oh, of course.
Right. You're going to have people calling it a socialist takeover, while others are saying it's the only way to salvage capitalism.
Absolutely. It cuts right to the heart of what is the role of government in the 21st century?
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's what's so valuable about what Duncan's doing here.
Correct.
He's asking those tough questions.
Yeah.
That a lot of people are afraid to even consider.
He's challenging the fundamental assumptions about how our world works, or how it should work, maybe more importantly.
Yeah. And whether or not you agree with this idea of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund, I think just having this conversation, grappling with these implications of creditism, that's a step in the right direction.
It's kind of a wake-up call, though, isn't it? This idea that we've entered into this new economic era.
It is.
And it's not just a continuation of what came before. Like, it's a completely different ballgame.
Yeah. But I don't think it's hopeless.
Yeah.
I think the key takeaway here is that we're not just along for the ride.
You know, we have agency, we have choices that we can make both individually and as a society. And the first step is understanding the forces that are shaping our world.
Right. So it's about taking ownership, not just of our own personal finances, but like, what kind of future are we creating?
Exactly. And that starts with asking those questions, even if they're uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well said. On that note, we're going to leave you with this. Check out Richard Duncan's work if you found this deep dive even remotely interesting.
Yeah, he's got a lot to say.
Whether you agree with him or not, it's a perspective on the global economy that you don't hear every day. And as we've seen today, sometimes facing those uncomfortable truths is the only way we're going to find a better way forward.
Keep asking those tough questions, keep digging deeper, and, most importantly, stay curious.
And on that note, we'll see you next time.